Throughout a story's runtime, it undergoes a transformation. In its beginning stages, a story extends outwards and sets up plot points and foreshadows future events. But at some point, a story passes through a threshold and emerges into its second half. Here a story starts to converge on its climax, and it is required to pay off what it set up. It is no longer extending outwards, but it is contracting inwards by tying up loose ends to produce a satisfying end to the journey. These last 3 levels of Halo CE form the climax for the game. When we finish the cutscene in 2 Betrayals, Cortana immediately comes up with a conclusion as to how we can address this dual-headed crisis of the Flood and Halo, and that is to destroy Halo. So before we even leave the control room complex, we have a method of victory to guide us through this finale. And that is to make a starship's fusion reactor go critical, so that when it explodes, it should destroy the ring. And it happens that we have one such ship waiting for us, the Pillar of Autumn. So we have a clear path to how we can win in this scenario. Now, 2 Betrayals is very similar to level 2, Halo. Both levels are set up. Both have the Master Chief doing a filler task, rescuing Marines and destroying pulse generators. Both levels have Cortana do a lot of the heavy lifting for the story through her dialogue. She even searches for keys and the Pillar of Autumn via the Covenant BattleNet. However, 2 Betrayals has a weak frame, whereas level 2 Halo has a strong one. The way that 2 Betrayals presents the task of destroying the pulse generators is written with a weak justification. Cortana wants us to destroy these generators based on a contingency, in case the Monitor finds another way to activate Halo. This is an if statement, and it is weak for 2 reasons. First, because it lacks the crisis of immediacy. We should feel tense in this level. We should be threatened by a danger that is happening now, rather than one that might occur at some point in the future. It would be very different had Cortana said, the Monitor is powering up Halo, he must have found a workaround for the Index, we need to stop him now, the generators are a way that will prevent us all from dying. That way of presenting the task as an immediate crisis would provide us with a sense of danger that is more fitting for a climax. The second reason is that there is no reaction from Spark to our destruction of the pulse generators. A character's reaction does a lot of heavy lifting in selling the importance or the gravitas of a character's action. Action almost always requires a reaction to be complete. If Spark spoke to us as we destroyed the generators, it would help sell the illusion that this task we are doing is important and having a serious effect on the world. Consider an example. In Halo 3's level Cortana, we have to destroy High Charity's generators. When we do this, the Gravemind responds and the world changes in response to our action. It's not a great example on its own, but compared to 2 Betrayals, it is a lot better. It shows how 2 Betrayals lacks a necessary reaction to us destroying the generators. In addition to the weakness of its frame, 2 Betrayals is kind of all over the place with its environmental storytelling. Sometimes it misses, and sometimes it hits really hard. I suggested at the end of the assault on the control room that it is weird that Chief leaves Cortana alone, because the Covenant would recapture it, and his goal was to protect Cortana from the Covenant. The top of the temple in 2 Betrayals has some ammo for human weapons, but it could use Marine corpses and military gear to boost its environmental design. The idea that I previously proposed is that controlling the control room is vitally important, and the UNSC should be trying to secure it. In this level, I think we should be seeing the aftermath of that effort. The Covenant have retaken the control room, and now the Flood are launching an assault on it. It would be a nice touch to arrive back at the control room just as the Covenant are breaching the doors. We arrive as the last Marines are killed. Earlier on, I suggested that Master Chief is a sole survivor, everyone else dies but we survive, and there is a cost to our victory. So seeing the last Marines die as we arrive would help to strengthen that idea. Now we don't know how far away the control room is from Ground Zero for the Flood outbreak, but it makes sense that the Flood would go straight to the control room to prevent Halo from firing. It is also kind of bizarre then, the Covenant forces were told to withdraw when they had encountered the Flood, but we see them using upgraded forces here to secure the control room, with armor and heavy weaponry. Partially this is because we are going to be fighting the Covenant at the end of the game, but it could be a reaction to the Flood, and we can see how much of a threat the Flood are from the Covenant's perspective when compared to how they treat humans. When the Covenant deploy their troops against the UNSC, They don't use their best troops. They use their lowest ranking elites and their lowest ranking grunts. But when they fight against the Flood, they use the best they have, and that difference is so telling. Now, the outdoor fights between the Covenant and the Flood, especially at the very end of this level after Generator 2, conveys a great sense of chaos in the moment. The last 3 encounters specifically are some of the best ones in the game. Whether you choose to defeat everyone or skip over it, the sight of the battle happening around and below you as we get to our objective is a sight to behold, and it is strengthened by its nighttime setting. So this is to say that 2 Betrayals has some weaknesses, sure, but it has some amazing peaks in its environmental storytelling. Along with all of this, 2 Betrayals repeats the level Assault on the Control Room. Now, for this project, I've only played the levels as I've recorded them for each video, meaning it's been a few months since I played Assault on the Control Room because I basically took that footage after releasing Part 1. So that level is not actually fresh in my mind when I played 2 Betrayals. And as a standalone level, 2 Betrayals is amazing. I think it's only within the context of a 10-level game that it starts to become too similar to Assault on the Control Room because they exist in closer proximity. If someone plays the game in one sitting or over the course of a weekend, they will feel that repetition in a far stronger manner than if you play them over the course of different weeks or months. And upon playing 2 Betrayals in this way, I think it works well for what it is. There really isn't a part of this level that I felt didn't belong. The bridge section in this level where the Flood can jump over is way better than Assault on the Control Room's bridges, where you only have Covenant shooting across. Now, there are minor moments, such as there's this giant pillar in a canyon that is there for some reason and maybe has an elevator that isn't really used for much, so you could do more with the level. But I think when you compare 2 Betrayals to Assault on the Control Room, I think what needs to happen is we need to reduce the overlap by cutting more content out of Assault on the Control Room rather than making major edits to this level. Or to put it simply, 2 Betrayals isn't the problem. Assault on the Control Room is the problem. Now, 2 Betrayals has some other weaknesses that occur through 2 omissions. The first is that neither Cortana nor Chief tried to contact the other UNSC forces. We know from 343 Guilty Spark and the Maw that Foehammer is alive. She probably rescued the Marines at the end of the Guilty Spark level. So there are human forces alive somewhere fighting the Flood and the Covenant. But we don't try to establish communication or inform them of our plans, so that means that when Foehammer appears later on at the end of the game, she kind of appears out of nowhere. And I don't think this level needs much, but even a little dialogue that communicates with the rest of the human forces would go a long way to build and strengthen the climax. And I think we should be aware that even though the Marines aren't with us physically, they are being consumed by the Flood or being killed off in some desperate struggle. The next weakness of this level that I want to talk about is that Chief doesn't tell Cortana about Keyes. Chief knows that Keyes is captured by the Flood, and he has seen the Flood firsthand, but Cortana does not. So something should be done with this informational asymmetry. This level should maintain a vain, feeble hope that we will find Keyes in some kind of rescuable state. Again, who knows what the Flood do with their prisoners? And we only need a line or two of dialogue between Chief and Cortana about Keyes' capture, so that we remind the player and set up our expectation of finding him in the next level. The last point, and this is perhaps more of a curiosity, at the beginning of Halo 2, the Marine technician gets mad at us for wrecking our suit. And when we look at that cutscene, we can see that most of that damage is likely done here in 2 Betrayals, by drawing the suit's power to teleport us to Captain Keyes. It might be really interesting in a remake to try and depict the degradation of Chief's power armor over the course of the game, without somehow making the gameplay worse because of it.
The Covenant network is absolute chaos. From what I've been able to piece together, their leadership ordered all ships to abandon Halo when they found the Flood, but they were too late.
So we leave behind the level 2 Betrayals, which has a weak frame in how it tells its story, but it has some great action. And then we move on to Keyes, which also uses a minimal amount of story elements, but its action elevates it to be one of the best in the game. Whereas 2 Betrayals does a good job of showing the larger scale outdoor combat between the Covenant and the Flood, with all of the Covenant's weaponry, Keyes embodies the desperate fighting in close-quarter combat throughout the ship's hallways, and it does this amazing job of showing how desperate the Covenant are in trying to stop the Flood from leaving the ring. Part of the story elements here is that the Covenant are trying to clear the ship to evacuate it, but that is entirely doomed to fail. We can see how the flood infect any and every crevice of the ship, so there really isn't any hope of clearing away the infestation other than by total destruction. So the Covenant are sending their forces to essentially die and strengthen the flood that they are trying to stop. But we can also see that the flood are trying to escape, which elevates the threat of their existence significantly. If they're contained only to the ring, that's one thing. You can quarantine the ring. But if they are out there flying in space, it is a threat to everyone in the galaxy. And that is probably why the Flood are trying to form the Gravemind on the ship, so that they can leave the ring as quickly as possible. Now, I think there are 3 issues that I think are really important when talking about this level. In 2 Betrayals, Cortana says a starship's fusion reactors going critical will blow up Halo. Well, we have this Covenant ship. Why don't we use it to blow up Halo? But I think Cortana answers that question in a satisfying way. Their reactors have already gone critical, so they can't be used to blow up Halo. They're already burnt dry. And the second question we can ask is this. If the Flood are trying to escape and they're forming a proto-Gravemind, why doesn't Chief destroy it? Why don't we destroy the ship? We just get in and we get out. The answer to this second question is the ship is already broken. It's not going anywhere. It needs to be repaired before it can leave, and so we don't need to break the ship or prevent it from leaving. We just need to just get in and get out. And we are gonna blow up the Pillar of Autumn before the ship will be repaired, because the Covenant are just not gonna clear it of the Flood. So I think we don't really need to worry about destroying the Proto-Gravemind. That's gonna be taken care of with our actions in the next level anyway. So all we need to do is get in and get out. Speaking of getting in and getting out, this level is structured with a bookend approach. We start just outside of the control center where Keys is, and then we go through the level and we end back up in that same room where we encounter Keys, and then we leave. And this creates such an interesting dynamic for the level. It starts with a bit of suspense, with Keys still talking, and then we go through the level with very minimal story elements. There's hardly any dialogue. It's not trying to expand the story in any way. We proceed through dark corridors under the ship and through the ship as the fighting is super chaotic all around us. And then we have this great moment with Keys, and then we fight our way out. So it's a bit strange to say that Keys is a very strong level when it has very little story elements, aside from its excellent environmental storytelling and its moment with Keys. But I think one of the reasons why Keys works so well is that it makes great use of spectacle. Now, if we say a story is all spectacle and no substance, that's an insult. But spectacle does a lot to modify and elevate the story, especially as we get to the finale. We want to play everything up with a bit of showmanship to make the ending feel grand. And the environment of chaotic fighting between the Covenant and the Flood help to create the spectacle that is fitting for a climax. Action is story, and combat is story. So we don't need a lot of dialogue, we don't need to expand and bog everything down with a deep, elaborate storyline. We can just let the action speak for itself, and it does that wonderfully. We can also speak to how the moment with Keys complements this approach to telling the story through action and spectacle. Our moment with Keys is a very emotional end to his journey. It's a sad moment, it's a horrific moment, it's kind of this final goodbye to this character. And it is way worse than I remembered. Now, if you've read the book or if you've seen the video log that's nearby, the moment of Keys being absorbed into the Proto-Gravemind is utterly horrific. It's one of those great moments in the same way that the Flood reveal is. But I had forgotten about the gurgling noises that the Proto-Gravemind makes. So if you listen to this scene, it adds that extra bit of a grotesque element in just one of the best ways possible. So they go the extra mile to make our parting scene with Keys very memorable. And so now we just need to escape. Like, we just don't need a complex story here. We get in, we get out, and then we move on. And while you can just drop down and get the Banshees, if you go through the corridors, you can just find some great combat encounters, especially where you see the Hunters fighting in close quarters with the Flood. But despite how we get there, we get in a Banshee and we leave the Covenant to their doomed fate, and we proceed to our final step in the story. The Maw is the complete inverse of the first level of the game, and it is such a fitting bookend for Halo CE. Just like in the first level, the ship gets its own introduction, now decrepit and ruined. In the first level, we escaped the ship to land on the ring, now we board the ship to escape the ring. If we jump ahead a little bit, in Halo 2 the Arbiter says that by the time he learned of the demon's intent, there was nothing he could do. But when does the Arbiter learn of our goal to destroy Halo via the Pillar of Autumn? So we don't see the Arbiter in this game, but we know he's there. The Arbiter is the one who's leading the forces on this ring. So when we see Spec Op troops here at the Maw, we can know that he has taken some kind of command or action to place them here. But we can kind of gauge the earliest that he would have known about our actions to destroy Halo, and the latest he would have known. Obviously he doesn't know that we're planning to destroy Halo before we do. He only figures that out after we have acted. So sometime after we have destroyed the first pulse generator, but probably after we had destroyed all three, is the earliest that he would have learned of our plan. The latest is when we start to blow up the engines themselves. Now it could just be a coincidence that his Spec Op troops are there at the last level, but he probably finds out a bit earlier than that. This level also has one last moment of failure. Cortana's plan fails, because despite us using Keyes' as neural implants to overload the engine, Spark stops it. He has direct access to the engines, so he brings Cortana to a place where she says, "I don't know what I can do," which is actually a pretty amazing feat. And just like how we see that Cortana makes up for what Chief lacks, Chief makes up for what Cortana lacks, and he just has a very simple solution to fix it. Let's just blow it up. And this makes the engine room a quasi-boss battle. It is more of a puzzle that we need to solve, but destroying the fusion reactors causes waves of enemies to spawn, which is a mechanic puzzle bosses tend to use. Now it only resembles a boss battle, and it would be interesting to try and incorporate fighting Spark into this space. He's trying to stop you from destroying the engines, and I think it could use some more Covenant forces coming in to try to stop you as well. But for what it is, it's fine. Spark is himself a former human, so his words about the human records make sense in that regard. It is also a hint at the original idea that Forerunners were humans. And it's also interesting that Spark is still trying to negotiate with us as we are destroying the engines. So he's here in the engine room when we destroy the final reactor, but he escapes the explosion just as we do. So we don't get to see his getaway, but we know he gets away pretty quickly. We hear from Fohammer on the elevator ride up. I made this point a bit earlier, but her sudden reappearance is kind of awkward because it wasn't built up since the level 343 Guilty Spark, which the game probably should have done. She is meant to have this emotional death scene, so that lack of build-up makes that scene just a bit weaker than it probably should be. Although I don't feel like many people probably recognize that weakness. They probably just go, "Oh, Fohammer dies here, that's a sad thing." So the point is, it's not bad, it could be better. Now, the final thing that we just have to say is that Halo CE has an exceptional final sequence. The escape via the Warthog, despite the illogical track design, is amazing. It makes the escape feel tense, especially with the kilometer marker and the timer, and especially after Fohammer's death, the music picks up, the explosions happen around, so it does a really good job of presenting this last leg of our escape from the Pillar of Autumn and the ring, and then the final touch is that you have to make the very final stretch on foot. It's just this excellent scene, this excellent moment. And then of course Halo's explosion is so gratifying and so beautiful and enchanting, accompanied by the music. And so we can say that Halo has a really good climax and ending. And it's really, really well done and it should be praised for it. So final note about this level, before we get to some reflections about the game as a whole, is that aside from being basically the sole survivors along with Dust and Echoes, it seems that Cortana tries to justify their actions. She says, "We have no choice, we did what we had to do for Earth." But I'm not sure there is a need to justify their actions at all. In the larger view, destroying Halo is actually the single greatest contributor to the downfall of the Covenant, not that she would have known this at the time. So it's just kind of a weird characterization for her to try and justify what they did. I just don't think it's necessary. And I think Chief gets that, where he just goes, "Nah, this is only just the beginning." And I think it's so interesting that our actions at the end of Halo CE are largely responsible for saving all of humanity, because it is the destruction of Halo that begins to fracture the Covenant apart. So it makes this game even better in retrospect, starting immediately with the beginning of Halo 2. So before we end the video, let's have some reflections on Halo CE as a story as a whole. One of the issues brought up with Halo is the use of repetition at the end of the game, and I think this is just a non-issue. We leave Cortana in the control room, so we have to go back and pick her up at some point, so we might as well reuse that level while we're there. So 2 Betrayals reusing assets from Assault on the Control Room is totally fine. The Maw is a return to the Pillar of Autumn, and it creates a very excellent bookend for the game, so that's also not an issue. The only level that really poses a problem with reused assets is the level Keys. But Keys is such a strong level that it really doesn't feel like it matters. At least from a story perspective, the reuse of the levels is just not a big deal at all. I think if we were to look at these levels and we were to think about how would you remake Halo, I probably wouldn't make drastic changes to these final levels at all. I would keep them all kind of as is. Instead, I think it'd be wise to lean in on the horror aspect that these levels could imbibe. The fight between the Covenant and the Flood is very chaotic, but you can add horror aspects into it to help make it more cohesive with 343 Guilty Spark and the Library. A level like Keys, which can lean in with the dark purple lighting and the green glow of the Flood, would make for some great horror ambiance. And I think Halo could take some pages from Dead Space, largely because Dead Space takes lessons from Halo, so returning that influence would definitely be great for a Halo remake. You don't need to go full on horror, but you just add that bit of horror spice to the last few levels of the game to make it just a bit different from the beginning. And I think that kind of extra flavor would do really well in a Halo remake. So in terms of where Halo's story is strongest and where its weaknesses lie, I have a few comments. The cinematics of Halo are strong, and they've always been strong under Bungie. The cutscenes are great, and the in-game engine cutscenes are great. Everything about the way it's like filmed and presented, it's a game, so it's not filmed, but you know what I mean, is all really, really good. On top of that, Halo has a really strong cast. Cortana and Keys and Spark are outstanding, and they steal the show every time they're on screen, pretty much. And Chief is a pretty strong character in and of himself. And we'll talk about Chief later on, but I think, really, Keys and Spark are the 2 main characters that steal the show for me. Along with that, it's interesting that neither the Covenant nor the Flood have a named character to represent their faction. They are just there as factions. But I think that's okay. They are kind of like a faction acting as an individual. So you can look at what they're doing and kind of deduce the logic behind their actions, especially with regards to the Covenant. And since we know later on that the Arbiter is the one in charge of this fleet, we could reverse engineer from the Covenant's actions in Halo CE to kind of characterize the Arbiter as a character, since he is the one giving the larger macro commands for their maneuvers here. But at the very least, we get a good picture of who the Covenant are, kind of what they're doing, and understanding who they are a little bit. Obviously, it's not to the same level as we see in Halo 2, but you do get a picture of what the Covenant are like. And this game feels very integrated with the other games that surround it, Halo 2, Halo 3, Halo Reach. It really doesn't feel like it's been retconned in any significant way, aside from, the Forerunner are humans reveal, but that's neither here nor there. In terms of weak characters, I wouldn't call them weak characters necessarily, but I think the game could have done a better job at characterizing Johnson and his squad, Marines like Mendez and Jenkins, for example. I said this in part 1 and part 2, but just spend more time with them, tell us their names, just give us a moment to connect with them so that when we see them turn into Flood in the cutscene, it just is all the more painful. And Johnson becomes a very prominent character starting in Halo 2. It would be nice to feature him a bit more in this game. Halo CE is not about Johnson, but his story is important throughout the rest of the trilogy, and he is here in the game, so it would be nice to at least, I don't know, it's not a huge course correction, but you have a few tweaks that you can make with Johnson's character to make him stand out and more in line with what he will become in the next few games. Chief as a character is in a strange spot in Halo CE. I compared him to Guts from Berserk in the first video, and to reiterate that comparison here, you really can't judge Guts' character from Berserk by only looking at specific arcs. So Guts in a Black Swordsman or Guts in a Golden Age arc, for example, don't give you an entire view of his character and how he grows, because Guts takes a long time to grow and change throughout that story. And I think it's the same thing with Chief. Only with Halo 4 do we really get to have a story that focuses on him and his character growth. So it's hard to get a complete picture of Chief by only looking at Halo 1 or even the original trilogy. It's kind of like looking at Guts in the Black Swordsman arc, which I think I said in the video part 1, and saying, we have a full picture of Guts. Like, you just don't get a full picture of Chief in the original trilogy. And Bungie allowed or wrote extra material, books and comics and everything, that surround the game that gives more context for Chief as a character. Now, that's not for everyone, but it is part of his character, and it's part of how they explain and explore Chief. The novel does a way better job, I think, of exploring Chief as a character, but there's just things that a novel can do that a game just can't do, such as internal monologue. I mean, you just have to recognize the limits of the medium that you're working with. But all things considered, I think Bungie wrote a very interesting character. He's a very good silent protagonist type character. He is a brainwashed child soldier who was raised up to be this robotic fighting machine. Most of Chief's characterization fits with his backstory, and it makes sense why he is the way he is in this game. I do think, I said this in part 3, the game just misses a good opportunity to explore Chief, especially when he's on his own in 343 Guilty Spark and the Library, and also in 2 Betrayals when he's reunited with Cortana. I would have liked to see more reactions to his failure in 343, and perhaps a bit more of a reaction in the second half to the state of the UNSC against the Flood and the Covenant, and offer some kind of anything about the desperate situation that they're in. And I think his lack of reaction there in some of those moments is a weakness, and other times where he doesn't react totally fits with his character. So he's kind of in a strange place. So I never talked about terminals, so this will be the last major point. They're nice little Easter eggs, but really none of them are vital, except for the one where Keyes' last moments in the Proto-Gravemind are depicted, which is a scene from the novel. There are ones like the unknown spaceship that lands on the ring, and that detail just went nowhere in the larger story, so it's why include it? And I've thought about, what kind of extra content could a Halo remake have that includes the larger stories surrounding this event? There are novels, there are comics, right? So how do you include those? And it would be great to have side campaigns for some of them, but realistically, terminals would be a really good job of bringing those other stories to life. So having a terminal where Johnson escapes the Flood, and details about the UNSC forces and their base being attacked by the Flood and surviving against the Covenant and assaulting the Covenant ship with Jenkins' final moments, when they blow up the ship and everyone dies. Or terminals that give us a look at the Arbiter and what's his name, Lockjaw or something, where we get to see the events from their perspective, the Flood outbreak on the ship, and the internal struggles between the Arbiter and the Prophet who's there. Those would be really good content for terminals that really surround and support and give context to the larger story. I just don't think the terminals in the remaster are done particularly well, and it is an area for improvement for any kind of remake. So the last thing I'll say is, I appreciate Halo's story more, even with a depiction of okay, here's what it's weak at, here's what it's strong at. I think it just holds up really well under scrutiny. Thank you for watching, if you have watched this series, and next time we'll be doing something else.